Okay, we're on WBAI. It's 111 here on WBAI 99.5 FM in New York. My guest for this hour is Georganne Chapin. She's a healthcare executive here in the New York City metropolitan area. She's also, in the last few years, become an activist on the issue of circumcision, and I welcome you here to Walden's Pond.
Thank you so much, Sheldon. It's really great to be here.
I've been wanting to have you on the show for a long time.
We've been talking about that, haven't we?
Yes, we have been. How are you doing today?
Very well, thanks.
Well, people, for the education of the audience, if you could just tell us a little bit about yourself, please.
Well, sure. I have a long background working in healthcare. I studied anthropology as an undergraduate here in New York City at Barnard College. I grew up in a kind of multicultural household that moved around quite a bit and followed anthropology. It seemed to be a great worldview for me. And then I went and did some field work in Bolivia in the mid-1970s and started to think that the real problems that poor people were facing in the world were problems of access to resources and their health. And I came back to the U.S. and decided to study public health and have been working in the public health field in the United States since, I guess, about the early 80s, mid-80s. Somehow fell into running an insurance company for people who are on Medicaid and government programs and found that to be a wonderful venue for really trying to pursue ideas about making the healthcare system humane and cost-effective and high quality. Mm-hmm. My background, I subsequently went to law school, have a degree in law, and my background, I think, in anthropology and healthcare was really what led me into the circumcision issue and advocating for the end of infant circumcision in the United States.
So, I mean, this is a big issue. I mean, this is one of those issues that people have strong opinions about, stirs up the emotions, stirs up lots of positive and negative feelings. So, to go into this issue took some effort.
Well, yes and no. What's really interesting is that sort of intuitively for me, I always thought cutting off a body part of a newborn child was just odd, just weird. Mm-hmm. Nobody told me it was weird. It just didn't seem. I couldn't understand why somebody would be born needing correction or needing surgery. So in 1980, when my own son was born, I asked the doctor not to circumcise him, and really didn't give it that much of a thought. It just seemed like kind of the kind thing to do was not to cut up a body part. Mm-hmm. I was surprised as time went on, and particularly the women's health movement was so absolutely outraged about female genital cutting.
Yes. And
I would sort of toss out, well, we do that to boys. Mm-hmm. And it never ceased to amaze me how people would argue about how different it was, as though somehow the motivation or the motive of cutting was what, they don't like women, or in those countries they're trying to repress sexuality. Yeah, mm-hmm. Yeah, but what? So it didn't feel like a big dramatic insight on my part. What was interesting was seeing the backlash, because this was culture. It's just a cultural habit that we embrace. It's mm-hmm. one of our customs, mm-hmm. and people fight very hard to retain their customs, whether it's smoking in bars or using a fork instead of your fingers to eat, mm-hmm. or mm-hmm. driving on the right side of the road. Mm-hmm. And often we do things that don't really make any sense, but it's much harder for us to say, yeah, you're right, that really doesn't make any sense, let's stop, mm-hmm. than it is to say, well, there's got to be some reason to do this.
Yeah.
So yes, a big issue, but, for me, not really a very, not all that complex, actually.
I talked about the issue a couple of weeks ago here. Several weeks ago, I did a program about it, and I was discussing it. And a long-time listener, left some messages for me, and he was exercised about the issue. He thinks it's okay, and to paraphrase him, because of the cleanliness issue, mm-hmm. that it's imperative that a boy be kept clean. And with the foreskin, is almost impossible that a boy will be kept clean. He'll be dirty. I mean, he'll be having stuff underneath his foreskin, and that leads to all kinds of different things. He was just very dismissive about the whole about not cutting. And as someone who is steeped in healthcare and healthcare issues, I want to get your reaction to that.
Well, I'm steeped in healthcare issues, although my house is probably no cleaner than anybody else's. But I mean, circumcision did come about as an American custom, or in the Anglo world, as a hygiene issue when it grew out of Victorian England and America, where anything associated with sex or masturbation or smegma, or I think we can say smegma, right?
Sure.
We can say foreskin. I think that's not on your list.
No, that's not.
Any of those things were, considered sort of unspeakable things. I always am looking for analogy here because it really is very effective. And women have smegma also. We all do. We're, not embarrassed to say so. And the foreskin actually protects the penis from germs and from in a baby. So really my analogy that I use is that removing the foreskin, which of course from a baby boy involves ripping it away from the head of the penis to which it's adhered, and then creating an open wound, which will subsequently heal and scar over, would be like perforating a baby girl's hymen to be able to douche her. And of course, when you say something like that, people just think that's the most outrageous, how ridiculous, we would never do that. But it is really a very good analogy. Not everything you have needs washing. I mean, we don't wash our eyes out with soap.
Right.
We don't pull out our fingernails so that the dirt won't get under them. So it's just a reflex. When people use that kind of response, it can usually be diffused very quickly when you point out a couple of just basic facts about the human anatomy.
Yeah.
And of course, once a foreskin is separated from the head of the penis, which it does by adolescence in a normal male, you wash just the same way you wash any other body part. I mean, men can be taught, and boys and men can be taught to, wash their hands and brush their teeth.
Sure.
They can certainly be taught to wash their genitals.
Sure. As you well know, the internet in the last, I would say, 15 years or so has really helped educate people about this issue, which was dramatic. Of course, the groups like No Circ with Marilyn Mallows have just been immeasurable help to all out here. However, there are in popular culture, in movies, and on television, etc. There's periodically there appears episodes or shows about the issue. And from my experience, maybe yours too, that at the end of the day, when they talk about the issue of circumcision, particularly boys, at the final analysis, the boy gets cut. And there's a movie right now called
Partly Private,
which you just told me just won the best documentary at the Tribeca Film Festival. And I understand the movie is about circumcision. I also understand at the end of the day, the boy gets cut. What do you think about the popular culture, how it treats the issue of circumcision generally like this?
Well, there are kind of a couple of different levels to look at that. I haven't seen that film yet, so I do know, yes, that the boy gets cut. I think that's interesting because if somebody made, as this movie has been promoted as very thoughtful and entertaining and comprehensive and balanced and all of those things, about female genital, let's say we did it about an African woman immigrant and the girl got cut at the end.
Right.
I think the reaction to it might be quite different.
Yeah.
But I think there's so putting the movie aside, because I really haven't seen it.
Right.
I think there is a profound discomfort with what we do, and so there is therefore an effort to trivialize it. And if you look even the language of circumcision, that the snip drives me crazy, because if you've seen a circumcision, it's not a snip. It's a very brutal procedure that involves peeling away healthy live skin from a healthy live sexual organ, crushing, cutting, bleeding. It's not a snip. A snip is, we pull out your nail clipper on the subway and clip a hangnail. So I think because we are so profoundly aware on some level that what we're doing is questionable and not a no-brainer, that we seek to trivialize it. There was an article in the New York Observer, I don't know, a month or two ago, and I spoke with a reporter, and he was very, very smart and very thoughtful, and talked to a lot of people. And when the article came out, it was just so, there were all these words about the intact penis that were these like stupid words. I don't remember, the dragon,
Right.
and over and over and on and on. I thought, this just reflects our profound discomfort that we somehow have to turn it humorous. I mean, people will come to talk to us. We formed this new organization, and we have some brilliant consultants that have helped us too. They're helping us message this and help us to really reach out to the American public and appeal to their better instincts on this, right? But people will come into the room and they feel that the way to start a meeting is with a circumcision joke.
Yeah.
And, if you were meeting with a civil rights group, you wouldn't come in and tell some joke about how dumb black people are.
Yes, yeah.
If you were meeting, with an anti-human trafficking group, you wouldn't come in and tell some joke about a foreign prostitute.
Yes.
Or if you were meeting with a domestic violence group, you wouldn't come in and make a joke about, women wanting it or something.
Yes.
But somehow on this topic, it's okay, and it's part of the balance, and it's part. And I don't want to be a downer, but it's a pretty violent thing that we do to newborn babies, and I don't find humor in it. Actually, I find humor in the overall issue of being involved in something where everybody thinks you're weird because you're advocating not cutting babies as opposed to cutting babies.
Yes.
And I have a good time like everybody else does in my life. I mean, I'm not a complete
Right, yeah,
doom and gloom kind of person.
Right, yeah.
But I don't think circumcision's funny, and I don't think that the language around it is I think it's usually very inappropriate, and it reflects our deep discomfort.
Do you think in some ways that there's a book I have on my shelf called about misandry, and I look at it from that perspective about this issue, and whether or not the general perception is that boys are tougher, they can take it, so you cut them, and they're not gonna really feel it, as opposed to, of course, a female who would feel it. Is that maybe a comparative difference of threshold of pain, or?
No, I think it's very cultural. I think that over the last 30 years, wonderful progress has been made toward gender equity, and then I think that we, however, do not often acknowledge that young boys get it in the neck in our culture. As the mother of a son, I experienced, many times during his public school education where the expectations of him were far more stringent for his behavior than the expectations of young girls, boys were. And I think that, again, because we have it's kind of a cultural redress going on, because women have been one down and discriminated against. Somehow this has translated into, what are you worried about baby boys for? We need to worry about girls. And the fact that men continue to hold disproportionate power in this society, although I think that is changing somewhat, and the fact that women still earn less on the dollar than men doesn't mean that cutting a baby boy's penis when he's born is somehow okay. So we're very confused about all this stuff, and people are confused about lots of things. But I do think it says something about our attitudes toward men. We also, and boys, and we also have, any men who've been involved in men's movement issues.
Yes.
Certainly know that they can be kind of vilified for that. Stop whining, suck it up. What's a big deal? And so men, we have no problem understanding that a girl who's had, some kind of experience of brutality,
rape,
sexual brutality, even an infant, with would feel trauma. But we really resist for, I think, two reasons. One is because boys are supposed to be different. The other is because our motive in circumcising a baby boy, we're not setting about to inflict a sexual wound on a baby consciously. So we think that because we think it's for his own good and because we think it's cleaner, that somehow the trauma that is created by the event that there should be no trauma created by the event. Right. That the boy who's missing a substantial part of the skin from his penis should not really worry about it. I mean, we'll just explain, we did that because that was good for you,
right.
and you should, get over it.
Sure.
Or not even think about it.
Sure.
Whereas if we took the same amount of tissue away from female baby, and that child identified as a victim later in life, I don't think as a culture we would have any difficulty in seeing that as a valid reaction.
Sure. No, I hear you. We're on WBAI, by the way. It's 127. I'm Shelton Walden. This is Walden's Pond. I'm privileged to talking with Georganne Chapin, who is a healthcare executive and also has helped start a new organization called Intact America. If you could explain a little bit about that. And by the way, we will be taking some of your phone calls from you out there in the listening audience at 212-209-2984, 212-209-2984. You can also listen to us on the internet if you are at www.wbai.org. Intact America. Interesting.
Yeah, well, I love the fact that you say that I'm the founder, but I am not the founder. I was a person who was empowered to take this organization forward. The founder of Intact America is the movement of genital integrity. So many people who've been working on this issue for so many years, really since the 1970s and even earlier than that. And the Intactivist movement has been a grassroots movement. Many organizations, many movements, start that way because that's how they grow, that's how they get going. And over the years, people have made enormous progress. And the circumcision rate in the United States in the 1960s and 70s was well above 90%. And it is now somewhere between probably 50 and 55%. Some of that is due to immigration, but a lot of it is due to parents becoming aware that they don't need to cut their sons. It varies tremendously around the country. In the Midwest is very, very high. On the West Coast, it's quite a bit lower, probably down in the 20s somewhere. But it's no longer, unheard of to have an intact young man. So over the last few years, the last, say, 10 years, as I've been more and more involved with this, we've kind of a steering committee around the country of people involved in the various genital integrity organizations has come together, and a man, a Texas businessman named Dean Pisani, who has a 10-year-old son, and he's a very successful environmental remediation company. And when his son was born 10 years ago, he did a little research, and he said, this doesn't make any sense.
Right.
We're not going to circumcise our son. Why would we do that? And so his decision was made. No big deal. And the baby was born in Chicago at Northwestern University Hospital, and he said to, no circumcision, please. And he was solicited and harassed to pieces. He said he was asked and pushed no fewer than a dozen times. He was told he was doing his son a terrible disservice by leaving his body intact. He was told he would regret it. He was told his son would hate him. He was told that, it was the American thing to do, that it was the clean thing to do, that it was dirty not to do. And he got his baby home safely. And he was angry. And he decided to learn more. So he reached out to Marilyn Milos, who was the founder of No Circ, and started helping with small things, ads in American Baby magazine, and became, more interested as time went on. And fast forward to about 2 years ago, he asked us, a number of us, to put together a business plan for a new organization. And he said that he felt the time had come where a really big donation a really big amount of money could actually kick us toward the tipping point, where it would no longer be the norm to circumcise your child. It would be the norm not to.
Yes.
So Dean put up a massive amount of money for one philanthropist, and that is the money that we used to start Intact America. I was extremely privileged. I run an organization called the Hudson Center for Health Equity and Quality, which is an organization I founded sort of to the side of my health plan, and very loosely speaking, HCHEC, we call it, is about promoting a humane, cost-effective, high-quality healthcare system. So I had an infrastructure, we're a 501c3, and we were able to bring that donation in to HCHEC. My board was extremely supportive, and we are now running Intact America out of that organization. Intact America has its own website, which is www.intactamerica.org. We have 501c3 status through the Hudson Center, and so we can take donations. And we are in the process right now of doing the most exciting thing, which is kicking off a mass internet media and action campaign to remind the medical establishment in the United States that it's not okay to condone cutting baby boys.
Yes. This is wonderful. By the way, the website, again, is intactamerica.org. I've felt, and again, I don't have, I'm not speaking as in terms of on a factual basis or just purely speculative and anecdotal, that this particular procedure, circumcision, has had a corrosive impact on the American culture. I think that it's probably affected relations to the negative between men and women. You know, I mean, how do you feel about that? I mean, there's no. I mean, you can't put a data on this, but just my observation. That's just my.
I actually believe, Shelton, there's probably more data than we want to acknowledge out there. There's tremendous, because anecdotes are data too, and there are tremendous numbers of men who who have memories, shadow memories of their circumcisions, who have feelings of despair about their body. There are plenty of men who don't. You know,
right, sure.
That's okay too.
Sure.
Don't wish that kind of feeling on anybody. So I do think we do have a lot of data. It really comes down to into inhumane treatment within a culture of violence, and doing bad things to people does degrade us all. That is really what we're dealing with right now with the torture, you know, in the previous presidential administration, is what is the consequence of doing things that we know we shouldn't do, or doing things that are that inflict gratuitous. I guess all violence is gratuitous. That inflict violence and permanent harm on people. And I think when you have a culture that practices that as part of either the medical system or any other part of the system, it certainly does. Anybody who watches a circumcision will never forget it. Or if they forget it, it's at a cost. You know, you have to repress something pretty ugly and pretty awful. And if you've acquiesced to it without knowing what was involved, and then find out later, you know, you're going to feel really bad. The parents who have had their children circumcised, boys who've been circumcised, who've suffered from feelings of sexual inadequacy. I mean, these permeate the society, and the fact that we don't talk about it doesn't mean it's not there. On the other hand, we do all kinds of things. You know, all cultures have practices that are less than optimal, of course. So I think on some level it comes down to a personal and experiential phenomenon. But when you have a healthcare system that perpetrates something like this, you know, that has equipment and procedures and rules and billing codes and amounts of money collected and training of residents, and you're training people to do something that is not only unnecessary, but that is harmful and violent and risky, because boys do die of circumcision. They do, there's blood loss. We have an epidemic right now of methicillin-resistant Staphylococcus aureus, which is basically drug-resistant staph infection. And the American Medical Association has identified risk factors, and 2 of them are young age and open wounds. Why any American hospital is conducting circumcisions, is allowing circumcisions to take place in newborn nurseries, if you look at it just from a practical standpoint, is absolutely mystifying. It is mystifying. But, every day we circumcise between 1.1 and 1.2 million baby boys a year in this country, still.
Yeah, that's unbelievable. Before we go to the calls briefly, President Obama, the new president, has an ambitious agenda. One of his items on the agenda is comprehensive health care reform. You run a healthcare organization here in the metropolitan area. Briefly, what are your thoughts about the outcome of this? He's hoped to have it by the end of the year, something in place for the American people.
I think, I think our president is great. I think that the healthcare reform efforts that we're moving toward now will be less than optimal, because I think they're relying on the individual insurance model. And insurance is not the same as healthcare, so the tremendous amount of focus seems to be on making sure that everybody has an insurance policy. And if that's the way we pursue healthcare reform, I think we're going to be wasting a lot of money before we see universal healthcare. Unfortunate, not terribly surprising. My disclosure on this is I'm a single payer person. I believe that by getting rid of all the administrative costs in the system, I think that's the only way we're going to really get to giving health care to everybody. But it'll play out over time, and I think we're doomed to waste a lot of money before we get there.
Yeah, I hear you. Georganne, we're going to take a brief break. We're going to come back with listener phone calls for Georganne Chapin, healthcare executive, and also with an organization called Intact America, an organization dedicated to ending genital mutilation here in the good old US of A. We'll be taking some of your phone calls for Georganne and myself at 212-209-2984, 212-209-2984, here on WBAI 99.5 FM New York on this overcast, rainy first Sunday in May. And it's good to be here with you. 212-209-2984. When we come back, stay with us. Just a reminder, you can call us off the air at 212-209-2984, 212-209-2984. On the air, 212-209-2900, 212-209-2900 here on this edition of Walden's Pond. We'll be back in a few seconds. Stay with us. All right, we're back here on WBAI 99.5 FM in New York. Shelton Walden here. Walden's Pond is the program heard every Sunday between 1 and 2 p.m. discussing health, culture, politics, and so much more. I have healthcare executive Georganne Chapin here. We're talking about circumcision, genital mutilation in the U.S. of A. and the ways to go about ending it once and for all. Your thoughts, 212-209-2900 here. When you call, turn off your radio. I'd like to know where you're calling from and your name. We're going to have quick questions for our guests before we get off the air at 2 here on WBAI. Let's make a move here for this line here. Number 10, go ahead. You're on the air. Hello. WBAI, you're on the air. Okay.
Oh, is that me?
Yes, you're on the air. Turn off your radio, please.
I just did. Thank you.
Thank you.
I think for like 20, 25 years, I've held the same view as your guest. It's a no-brainer as far as I'm concerned. But 10 years ago, I had a booth at the Clearwater Festival, and I was right next to one of my members in my organization, Laurie Evans, who had a no-circ booth right across from me. And I thought I knew a lot about this issue, but I really didn't. And it's an eye-opening thing, and I see why that many men find it kind of icky to contemplate. I don't want to get off topic, but another issue that we feel uncomfortable with is rape in prison. And you always hear these late-night talk show hosts making jokes about it. Right. And it's just one of those other kinds of issues that we find uncomfortable.
Right. Okay. Thank you. You have any question? Okay. Thank you for your call.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, there are certain issues that we trivialize because they're just too horrifying. We don't know what to do with them. You're right.
All right, let's move on. Thank you for your call. WBAI, you're on the hello. Hello?
Yes, hi.
Hi.
Milton?
Yes.
Yeah, thanks for this program. Regarding that person that had to give a huge amount of money to try and get this off the ground, commercial radio here in New York, there was a really big talk physician called Dr. Adele. And to his credit,
Dr. Dean Adele.
In the late 80s, he said, the only reason I'm not intact is I had no say in the matter, and both my sons are. However, sometime in the 2002 time, Scientific American, a magazine I buy a lot, they had this whole article saying that in Africa, when they're circumcised, they have less disease. In other words, it's like you're pushing against a constant tide. I'm intact and my son's intact, but it's like you just.
All right, I hear you.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, and circumcision has a long history of kind of post hoc justifications, and HIV and STDs is the latest. Even if you buy the argument that by removing mucosal tissue from men, you might reduce the transmission of HIV, and I think there's a lot of questionable data here. But even if you buy that, you could probably accomplish the same thing by removing mucosal tissue from women, or removing other body parts, or sewing up body parts, and you really come down to the ethics of removing a body part from an unconsenting person, an unconsenting healthy person, a baby, with some speculative benefit, and also some, of course, speculation that they're going to be too stupid or too unconscious to learn how to use condoms 20 years down the line. So you're right. You're constantly chasing or being chased down with these new, did you hear about this? Mm-hmm. And we're used to that, used to this at this point. Thank you so much for that observation.
Thank you. WBAI, you're on the air. Hello?
Hello.
WBAI, you're on the air, ma'am.
Oh, well, I have to say something. I am now 66 years old. When I had my son, I was 21, and I had no clue about what that was at all. And the pediatrician said, I'm going to give you a gift. Took my son inside. To this day, every time I remember that little boy trembling, because when she told me to go get him, he was blue, cold, and shaking. To this day, I'm horrified about that. My son, he's 45, is the most, I think, hurt, emotional person. And all I can tell you is that memory will never die. And yet, I did not know any different. Right. And she said to me, I'm giving you this as a gift.
Isn't that something? Yeah.
And I tell you, later on I worked in hospitals. Now the mothers get to have a written consent. But I have seen midwives cut the shaft right off because they're inexperienced. And somehow these mothers, they don't even know what goes in those rooms. They're not present. And I kept saying, why? No anesthesia, the baby's screaming. No, the nerve endings are not developed yet. They're not feeling it. And yet you could see the screams and the horror that those babies were feeling. and nobody continues to care because the medical profession somehow considers that is not only that it should be done, but then those who have set us a tradition, you don't break tradition, because the egotistical stupidity of people will continue doing this.
I know. Ma'am, where are you calling from, ma'am?
I am calling from the Bronx right now.
Okay. All right. Thank you for your call. You have any? Thank you.
You said it all. Thank you so much. And also thank you for being so courageous about telling your story.
Absolutely. Thank you. 212-209-2900 WBAI. You're on the hello.
Oh, hello.
Hi.
Thank you for this wonderful program.
You're welcome.
I want to tell you quickly, I think this is a little bit new to the program. My daughter told me when she was in nursing school, during the pediatric phase of their training, they were told over and over and over to do nothing to raise the vital signs of the infants. And she said then they come along and circumcise them, and the vital signs go off the charts.
Unbelievable.
Yeah. So she and some of her classmates were standing around musing about this, trying to figure out why this contradiction. And one of them came up with what they all thought was the answer. It's billable.
That's certainly a part of it, isn't it?
Yeah.
And with regard to ritual circumcision, it seems to me that, first of all, it's barbaric. I mean that literally.
Yeah.
And to me, it seems to be a kind of branding, like the branding of cattle, to designate them as our property. They belong to us, and it involves the treating of the children as, it seems to me, as property.
Yes, there's been a lot of work on that. Len Glick, anthropologist and physician, wrote a book about Jewish circumcision.
Called Marked in Your Flesh.
Marked in Your Flesh. But I'll say, it's no less of a ritual when done in medical settings. I mean, and it is branding. It's saying you're an American boy. We're going to be doing this to you, and now everybody will know you're an American. As a friend of mine says, welcome to America, little man. I would just think, Shelton, let me just make one comment here.
Thank you for your call, by the way.
I think it's really important we remember that most of the world is not circumcised. And we talk about how dirty the intact penis is and how clean circumcision is. I mean, I would imagine that, the men of Italy and the men of France and the men of England and the men of Germany and the men of Holland and the men of all Scandinavia would probably not be too happy to know that Americans think that they're filthy because they're not circumcised. They have better health status than we do in this country, and they do just fine. So it's very important to remember our culture-centric perspective on this, and that it flies in the face of just plain fact.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. 212-209-2900. Thank you for your call. WBAI, you're on the air. Hello?
Hello?
Yes, you're on the air.
I'm calling because I'm a mom, and my son was circumcised when he was a little baby, and I was in the room because he had just had surgery at the age of 2 days, and so he was a little bit older, and his surgeon actually sent me to her husband to have him circumcised, and I did it, because it was family tradition, and it was the worst. I've been feeling terrible about it.
How old is your son?
Ever since. He's 25, and he's fine, and he has no memories of it, and I don't know how much that aspect of this really has anything to do with it, but the fact that I subjected my son to such terrible pain is something that's really bothered me, and I really appreciate this program.
Well, I want to say two things to you. One is I have always felt that I was just very lucky that I didn't do what you did. Just lucky. I mean, I'm probably, I'm no smarter. I'm no different. I was lucky that this crossed my radar screen and I didn't do it. But let me make one other suggestion. By speaking out, you're doing a wonderful thing. Get involved. Get involved in this movement. This is a very, very gratifying thing. Many of the people who are involved in the intactivist movement really say, I made a mistake. I didn't know any better, but I want to make sure that other people are not going to make this mistake. And you'll be doing a wonderful thing for yourself. Sounds like your son is fine.
He is fine, but I just think that if people knew how incredibly painful it is, and that all the stories of it not hurting children are absolute funk that it would help it would help a lot of parents decide not to do it.
Well, it's
now.
great. It's great that you're telling your story.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you,
You're
ma'am.
welcome.
Where are you calling from, by the way?
Brooklyn, New York.
Okay, thank you for your call.
Okay.
WBAI, you're on the air. Hello? WBAI, you're on the air.
Good afternoon, Shelton, and good afternoon to your guest.
Yes.
One, could you repeat the name of her organization again? And could I offer a suggestion as to how, because she's a 501c3, she could raise money through the networking of Good Search, the search engine that raises money for charities?
Well, thank you for that suggestion. We're exhausting all possibilities on that. And the organization is Intact America, INTACT America, all one word, and it's at www.intactamerica.org.
Okay, thank you for your call. WBAI, you're on the air. Hello? WBAI, you're on the air. Hello?
Oh, yes. Hello.
You're on the air.
Oh.
Turn off your radio, please.
Yes. Hi, Sheldon, and thank you so much for this guest.
It's Shelton, by the way.
I'm sorry.
It's okay.
Well, speaking of names, let's keep Bernard and our other man, the station director, Mr. Riddle, on the air. Please email Pacific, everybody. We want local autonomy, just like we want our boys to be able to make that decision if they ever want to do it on their own, not parents deciding, you know. So for the guest, thank you for talking about single payer. Could you explain how people could get involved with that single-payer movement?
I would really, Shelton invited me here to talk about circumcision today. I'd really like to keep it on topic. You can Google me, Chapin, Georganne Chapin, Chapin, and see some of the work I've done on healthcare reform, and reach out to me. You'll find me on the internet, and I'd be happy to talk to you about it offline.
All right, thank you. WBAI, you're on the air. Hello? Okay. WBAI, you're on the air. Hello? Turn off your radio. Hello? Okay. WBAI, you're on the air. Hello?
Yes, hello.
Yes, you're on the air.
Yes, hi. Thanks for taking my call. Great topic. I did see that movie, Partly Private.
Yes.
The woman, the subject matter in the movie, she was very torn with her decision. It was a very protracted situation. And at the end, she did end up doing that. And then there was a second option to do so. And I was kind of disappointed because she, even though she was so torn by having to make that decision, the husband and the wife were kind of battling with each other about it. And she ended up doing the same thing again. But I want to really touch on the subject of
quickly,
religion.
Sir.
Yes, religion. And I had a woman in my cab. I'm a yellow cab driver, and she mentioned to me that it has something to do with a covenant. I don't know if maybe your guest might be able to touch upon that.
I'm not. Yes, I mean the covenant was between God and Abraham, and I mean that's the literal biblical interpretation of this. There are a lot of Jewish scholars that believe that infant circumcision actually grew out of old or much older infant sacrifice custom, where babies were killed to appease the gods. Really, ritual Jewish circumcision is not my field of expertise, but if you want to look at Lenglick's book Marked in the Flesh, I think you'll find out more than you would ever need to know in a lifetime or want to know in a lifetime about Jewish circumcision.
Yes, he was a guest on my show.
Wonderful book.
Also, I just want to say to the book's called Marked in Your Flesh by Leonard Glick. I also want to recommend a movie, if you ever get a chance to see. It's by a gentleman by the name of Victor Schoenfeld, who, by the way, used to be a producer here at WBAI many years ago. He did a film on circumcision called It's a Boy. And it's about an Orthodox circumcision and a Muslim circumcision over in London. And it's after you see this movie, in my view, you will never want to do anything like this to a child again. It was just that powerful. And he's been on my show too a couple times. He's very much an advocate against circumcision. And he also is Jewish too, and I would recommend that.
We've had this discussion many times about religion, and as an anthropologist, someone with a background in anthropology, I think a lot about cultural relativism, and the position that if you believe that it's wrong to cut a newborn baby, it doesn't really matter what religion or what kind of ethnicity is flowing in that child's blood. Right. It really is not. It's not pertinent at all. It's if you think that somebody is entitled to their body parts, you're going to protect babies of any background and any religion. Just the same way you wouldn't say, oh, those are African girls. We don't mind if they cut African girls. We just wouldn't want to cut American girls.
Absolutely.
You just believe it's wrong. You believe it's wrong.
Absolutely. Georganne, unfortunately, we have come to the end of our show. What's the website for the organization again?
www.intactamerica, that's INTACT America.org. We will be, within 6 weeks, we'll have an action website up. Right now, it's sort of just a quiet little website, but there's plenty of information about circumcision. We'll be posting very soon our policies and principles, which I think your listeners will find interesting. And I just want to thank you, Shelton, for letting me be on this program and talking about this issue.
Anytime. You're always welcome here.
Great callers, great call-ins, questions. Thanks so much.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Okay.
Georganne Chapin, healthcare executive, and with the organization called Intact America, intactamerica.org. Shelton Walden here, Walden's Pond, on this Sunday, May 3rd, 2000.